way back. I've been in the business here 20-something years, and I've learned through, I came out of entertainment and ended up in video game, worked for EA for a number of years, making highly complex, big AAA video games, sports simulated genre. So that's actually where I learned Agile. Actually, we went to an Agile transformation at EA that I was a part of there, and we made a lot of mistakes. So I learned a lot. And this session is going to be about metrics, right? So how do we measure what we're doing, and how do we make sure that those measurements are meaningful and actionable, right? Because there's no point in measuring something if we can't take action on what we learned from those measurements. So we're going to talk very informally here, right? There's no slides. This is a conversation. Okay? I'm not going to sit here and try and tell you what you should measure or how you should measure it. Okay? In terms of Agile metrics, this is a little bit of story time, if you will. We're going to talk about some of our experiences here in running projects and dealing with organizational challenges, right? So this is one of the aspects of running projects and working in large organizations with a PMO and probably their own agenda on what they want to see you measure, and does that really make sense? So, so a key theme, hopefully we're going to emerge out of this conversation, is around how to measure outcome versus output, okay, right? A lot of typical project management tended to lean towards measuring lines of code or whatever, right? Very output-related kind of metrics. So how do we really get to outcome versus output? So we'll talk a bit about that. We're also going to talk a little bit about predictability. Okay, so again, organizationally, quite often, right, we have to have some way to measure that we're delivering something, and there's a ability to project forward and say, oh, based on what we're measuring now, we can predict, right, to some degree what's going to happen in the future. We know that software development is somewhat unpredictable, but you know, organizationally, if a company's going to make an investment in software development, right, they're looking for a return on that investment. And so you have to be able to demonstrate some level, right, confidence that you're measuring what you're doing, and eventually that is going to return on that investment. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you apply metrics in that regard without stifling your creativity and ability to pivot and innovate and all those things. You also hope that being agile does for you in software development. Okay, so that kind of sets the stage. I'm going to pass the mic here, let these guys introduce themselves as well. Also, I want to make it clear, okay, so we've got a panel discussion here, right? So I'm hosting, I have two panelists. You guys are the third panelist, okay? So I am really hoping this is going to be very interactive. I want to hear some of your stories, your challenges, and say, we're not going to preach, we're not going to tell you how you should do this stuff. This is a conversation. Okay? Fair enough? You guys excited? All right. It's not going to be quite as fun as running around doing the chaos thing over there, but I promise we'll hopefully learn something very interesting today.
Oh, that's a surprise. So it's been like 7 years I'm doing Agile coaching specifically. Okay? So these days, I used to work in France, and I went to Hong Kong and Singapore a year ago. Today I'm working for Palo IT. So Palo IT, it's an innovation company, doing consulting and delivery, but the passion is for innovation. So where it connects with my job is, we believe you can't be innovative if you don't work in Agile. So that's why we're a few Agile coaches in the company working in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Paris. Just to help our clients start going Agile if they want to be able to foster their innovative ideas. Like Jazz over here working between Singapore and Herbert over here. So feel free to talk to them in Hong Kong. That's why I'm doing it today.
I'm Lawrence. I'm a Scrum Master and Agile coach at Cafe Pacific. I've been doing software engineering for all my professional career. I I start as a director, then working in London and Hong Kong in really huge company, Fortune top 5 companies, into really small startup with 1 or 2 people. I've been a Scrum Master for more than 6 years. So I'm currently Scrum Master and Agile Coach at Cafe Pacific. Cafe, as you know, is a huge company with 30,000 employees worldwide, and we got 1,000 people already in IT. So it's a huge organization and a lot of issues and problems where we are dealing with Agile Scrums. Outside of Cafe Pacific work, I'm also a professional Scrum trainer, doing Scrum Master, Product Owner, and Director training. This is my background. For my issue, like mentioned before, we are dealing with large organization issues. In the large organizations, we are talking about not just one project or one thing is easy, you don't need to measure, you just do things. But when we're talking about 1,000 people, we have like maybe 200 of big project going on, then there may be some incentive to start measuring stuff.
Quick comment. I feel I'm talking to an empty alley. You think there's a way we can back up the chair or something? To make it more comfortable.
Looking down the aisle.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to look at.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That is better, yes.
Are you not too intimidated since we backed up the chairs?
I know, yes. I'm a little scared of heights, so if I look nervous, it's because I can fall down from here. So, all right, so let's, what I want to do, I'm going to kind of start with, I'm going to ask each of these guys to tell me a little bit of a story about a project that didn't go so well. Or, if you will, we were measuring the wrong thing, right? So we thought we were doing well, okay? But at the end, the result actually, the outcome was not what we really wanted, okay? The old saying, right? The operation was a success, but the patient died, right? So we've all got some stories like that if you've been around long enough, right? You've done a project and you were given some specs and you built that software and you spent 6 months or a year doing this and you followed all the right steps and you delivered working software every 2 weeks or whatever it was, and then you got to the end and nobody wanted to use the software, right? So successful, but not really successful. So why is that, right? So let's talk a little bit about that and some stories about examples like that where we actually kind of measured the wrong thing and tricked ourselves into believing we were being successful.
Like I told you before, how many do you want? The classic example is, I think it's almost on TV on like the Silicon Valley series, but like suddenly the company want to go mobile and they want to do an app, and at the beginning you feel what could be a success point and say, okay, number of downloads, something like this, all right, everything runs quite smooth, quite fast, full agile, amazing, it's released, and then champagne, because it's a success, you got hundreds of thousands of downloads, and everybody says, yeah, it's going great. But so you say, okay, you download the app, but when you go to the App Store, you look at it, and the reviews are terrible. What's my features, crashes all the time, performance not working, I cannot log in, that kind of stuff, and they barely make a 3-star, and when you don't have 3-star, you're not existing in the App Store. But still, you look around, it's just, I mean, the KPI are matched, champagne, but actually, the app is terrible. I've seen it more than once. I've seen it more than once. I hope that,
I want to ask a quick question. How many of you had heard of velocity? Any hands? How many of you use velocity as a measurement of your team performance? Anyone? No one? That's a good thing. So the
We'll talk
example.
more about that when we talk about predictability now,
Yeah.
because velocity is a key metric.
Yeah,
Predictability.
just want to talk about our journey at Cafe Pacific. We started Agile adoption about 4 years ago. So when the team starts, we don't know much. We try to do the basic sprint planning, but when you do a sprint planning, you want some basic level of predictability, right? So it's a natural thing. We want to measure the number of story point after the maybe for the last week's sprint. We come up with some trend, we come up with some velocity. Some velocity we think is a good measure of how successful is a team is improving. If the team is doing well, the velocity should be quite stable and should be going up, and our productivity should be really high and everyone is happy, but that did not happen. So velocity is a really good measure. It helps the development team to predict what they can plan for the next sprint. But I think Stephanie and Daryl mentioned software development by nature is complex. There's a lot of unpredictability. Technology is unpredictable. Even you've been using the same technology for 5 years, there's always some unknown. Maybe there's some legacy code, maybe there's some defects, there's some integration issues, there's some dependency, there's some architecture issues, there's always some issue. At the business side, again, we have some similar issue. The product owner does not know what he wants. Even the product knows what he wants. Maybe his manager wants something else. Maybe the sales want to change the color. Maybe the end user don't really like the product. Maybe we are building the wrong thing completely. What we predict at the beginning does not make sense. But what be the only measure we have at the beginning is just velocity. But once we start believing in velocity, like the product owner, the BU, and IT performance practice, like I mentioned, Cathay Pacific is a huge team. We have different teams doing really different things. Once a measurement coming up, they start to do funny things with these measurements. Velocity is good, but we starting put into the contract with our vendors. Because we don't have much internal development team, we have to use 4 or 5 different vendors. Once we put our velocity into the contract, the vendor, they must deliver 100 story points per sprint. That's actually in the contract, that's actually happened, I found out like 1 or 2 years after. Then we start doing funny thing. We start building up technical depth. We skip tests. Even we are doing perfect scrum, we have sprint planning, we have sprint review, we have increment, we have product owner. Still, the quality is really bad. And once we have the velocity building, even we have in the middle of the sprint, maybe the product change in mind. Maybe we found out some business flow issue. Maybe we found out some technical issue. We still cannot share. The vendors, they are given incentive to trace, just to build up more technical depth, to build more defect, just to meet the target. So end of the product, we have more technical depth, we have lots of issues. So just from a project perspective, it's successful, it's within budget, it's within timeline, within most of the requirement, but turn out like you said, patient is dead. Completely, we got really, really bad review. And like after 2 years now, we replaced the vendor completely, we switched to a different vendor, we try to use more internal hire people, but turn out we still facing out defect like 2 or 3 years ago. We're still in the deep hole. Like that project I don't have much control, but even for the project I control as a Scrum Master, I'm still guilty. Like for my team, like as a part of big corporations, we have to set KPI for a developer. We have to set measurement for developer, then I have to set the velocity you must deliver certain points. But again, once you give an incentive to people, they will start doing funny things. They will stop merging the code. Like even in the sprint review, they are showing the perfect feature to user, but turn out it's in 2 different branches. They haven't merged it. So what we end up is we have to make sure we have entered all those minor details in our definition of done. You must change all your code, you must merge all. But that is, again, you are giving people incentive to do really wrong things. So velocity itself is a really, really good measure. It helps the run team. But if you use it wrongly, you get really bad and horrible results. Even you say you're doing Agile, you say you're doing Scrum, but no, you are not really doing Agile.
So I just want to comment a little bit on what I heard there, right? So something that I honed in on, well, a couple of things. But first, a comment that be careful if you really hone in on one metric, right? Whether that's velocity or whatever it is, right? Because you make that so important that, right, your team is going to focus on that and it will change behaviors. okay? Maybe not the behaviors you want to change. So my example on that one, when I was at EA and we first started doing Scrum, right? So the senior leadership wanted to see those sprint burn down charts every day, right? And so what happened was, right, we had conservative folks who would, they would start working on their tasks and stuff, but they didn't want to declare anything done, right? Their stories in the sprint weren't going to be done until they were absolutely sure. So they would hold on to them and not mark them complete. They were still, iterating or whatever, waiting for QA feedback. But when you looked at the sprint burn down, right, it was like, it's going like this, and then we get to the last day of the sprint, and then it would drop, right? Well, this made management absolutely crazy. And they were like, we just don't know. We're so afraid we're going to get to the end of the sprint and you're not going to have anything done, right? Because we never saw it kind of burning down, systematically through the period of the sprint. So they complained about it. So what happened was we had engineers that would go in and they would, they rigged the system basically so that the graph, the sprint burn down, looked great. It meant absolutely nothing. All they did was rigged it in the system so they could make sure that upper management saw a burn down chart that looked good. It didn't help at all. It made no difference. It didn't change the outcome. It simply, right, made management, feel better because the graph looked good. Okay, so be really careful. It's important when you're measuring, right? You're picking those metrics, right? Because people will react to it, and behaviors will change depending on what you made important, right? So, so the other point of that is there's always multiple metrics. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the kind of the models, right, of trying to be agile and the things you should measure more holistically than just at the project level even, but organizationally to be agile. And the key there is balance, right? That you measure a spectrum of things and keep adjusting, on multiple axes, right? So that, again, if you focus all your energy in one particular aspect, you may improve, or you may just trick yourself, right? And everybody's focusing on that, meanwhile it's a train wreck somewhere else, okay? So now we'll switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about, some examples where, things work a little better. And we've actually had some positive experience with measuring something and then being able to react to what we learned from that measurement and actually improve our outcomes through metrics.
So there's this project. I thought first it was, we mention it as a failure, but so there's a website from French television about sport that I was coaching. They had actually two trends. If you're into sports news, there is a all-day trends about sports, all the news you can get. So you need a lot of journalists on board and so on. And there is events, like the touristic season, if you're like me, when you finally pay attention to sports, the World Cup of football, Olympic Games, Tour de France if you're into cycling, that kind of thing. So they were working, they had this more day-to-day news website, and when they figured out they wanted to do the next event, which was, I think it was a race cup, Formula 1, and then there will be Tour de France, and then there will be Olympic Games. So they were willing to finally make more, use the events to attract people to stay recurrent. So they wanted that the audience curve look like there's a peak at the event, but every time it remains a bit bigger than the last one for recurring and so on. So building a recurring audience apart from the events. But the events was just the niceties. The main topic of the site was the long trend and the day-to-day. After they did a few of these events very well, they beat the records on audience for Olympic Games and so on. It was tremendous. But the audience remained low. All in all, their journalist team wasn't up to speed with very famous L'Equipe, so French news site who's been there for decades, great journal, paper and news. They couldn't beat them up. And they realized, since they're a branch of French television, people turn towards them for events. So they switch gears, and for the next events, the website become more of a platform to build events on the snap very quickly. They decided to onboard people who were very good at media players, to have the best event experience, like giving you inside the events when you are there, and also you have to connect to a lot of external data. Like if you're on the result, basically, that's an API external, you have to connect to it. It's very difficult to get connected to this API. They are always a bit weird, but they focus all their effort on it. So they're focused on making great events, and they knew that the day-to-day website, that wasn't very important. So the layout and the UX for day-to-day news, it just, they didn't even pay attention. It was a mutating website that can take one shape or another for events.
I just want to ask a quick, so just kind of a follow-up question on that. So would you say then that part of the key, right, to turning that around was the kind of usage metrics? So measuring, you know, how people were responding to the product, right? So initially, right, it was all kind of based on theory. We believe you're going to do this, but once we measured how people were actually consuming, right, the data, what they were responding to, then you were able to go back and improve, right, incrementally. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think those events, they also introduced, they changed a little bit. I think before that they measured some recurring users. They were betting that people were going to get subscribed to the site. When you go to an event, you don't get subscribed. You're just an anonymous visitor. And so just because they thought they will face some performance constraint with the event, just for that they introduced more accurate, unique visitor and tracking pages and navigations and more accurate UX. But then they look at it, and this is I think the good thing they did. They followed this news, this data, and not the previous one. They could have just considered them anecdotal, but they really trusted this new data. They looked at the right things, and so they've been taking the logical step.
Yeah, yeah. Good. Okay.
Okay, so just to follow our previous bad example. So previously we know browser is bad, we should not be using it. But now we are struggling, we have to answer our management what kind of measure we need to use. Because to top senior management, there may be like 100, 200 team. If you tell the management like, we cannot check anything, we just do the render, do whatever we want, it's just not going to be feasible in large organization. So we have to think of something quick. Actually, but we still struggle for 1 or 2 years. We try to start measuring more parameters, like measuring velocity itself is bad. Maybe we start measuring about escape the defense. We measure how many story points, etc. We expand the long-term trend, and we measuring our agile maturity patterns. Do we doing all the Scrum events? Do we have one product owner? Are we really respecting product owner decision? But later and later we found out those measurement is not really helping. So I actually start to think a lot about what Agile is really for, and actually went to Boston to take lessons from Ken Schreiber. So got some insights. So a lot the lesson actually is similar to what Dion mentions. We start focusing on the actual product itself, whether some user actually using our new features, whether the end users are happy with the feature. These are more important features. And when we think of software or business, the whole point of being agile is to serve the business right. The business itself want to earn money. When we build software or product, we just don't build it just for the fun of it. We want to make sure the company is earning some benefit, right? So we start measuring the actual benefit come back to the company, how much money the app is generating, or how much cost saving, or does it help the brand? Do we win any awards? We start measuring those things. And also one thing is we start measuring by the whole team. Because we are usually sometimes a really large team, we got maybe 100 people, and with 4 or 5 different vendors. If you give each vendor some incentive to do just its own self, it's not really good for the product. So we measure about the whole product. We start measuring whether they are able to deliver one increment every single sprint, whether everything is integrated nicely and happily. We start measuring the release frequency, how frequent the release. That actually puts some pressure into the business. They have to think more carefully, they have to split into different business value. And when we ask the tough question, what's the business value of the whole point of covering the whole app. They actually have some kind of interesting side effect outside of the team. Because currently the first release we are struggling. We are into 7 months of development. Product owner is extremely happy. We can launch the product next week. The product owner also have a project steering committee just for the formality. Just make sure all the stakeholders are happy. We can launch it. But suddenly after like 3 days, the CEO told the product owner, we cannot launch it. But the CEO actually tell the team, I'm not sure how we can launch it. Possibly you can talk to other stakeholders. So the struggle actually lasts for 3 months. So the product owner have to different topic business unit, different stakeholders, just to make some refinement. Actually, we just change the layout from a tab bar to sidebar. Whether they help business, we don't have any clue. But once we cover putting measurement, you have to put business value to everything. Then the senior management, they start thinking, they start to give a good direction to the team that actually the product owner can release it more frequently, and we can release some features that actually everyone is using. And we, in the development team, we stop tracking velocity. We just tell them they should focus on the sprint goal. It's even okay to sometimes fail it. They should focus on the software quality. They should put more focus on definition of YAM. They should do manual code review. They even doing Solid Kit just to do automatic code review. We are doing a lot of the CI and CD things just to improve the quality. It's a challenge. When I first tell the senior management we should stop using velocity, take it out of the contract, they freak out completely. So I will give an example like I want to travel from Kuntong to Tsimsha. Do you measure how much time I get to there, or do you measure the speed of my vehicle? If you measure speed or the velocity, because they really love velocity, they think it's the only measure in the world. So I measure if I go from Tsimsha to Kuntong Tsimsha, if I take taxi, maybe 10 minutes, the speed maybe 60 kilometers per hour. But if we use this speed as a measurement of the success of the team, the brander can build a rocket from Kuntong to the moon, to the Mars, and then come back to the Earth. It's, the velocity is really huge. The brander is taking a lot of the money, but it's not really helping the business. Because business, like we mentioned in the beginning, we just want to focus on the outcome. We just want to make money for the business. We don't really care about the output. Like we create like maybe 100,000 of line of codes. We don't care. We just want really working software.
So I am going to solicit some stories from you guys, but I'm going to tell one of my own real quick. So at EA, when I first started doing Agile, we had 2 outcomes that they really wanted to achieve. And it was part of the reason they went to Agile, decided to try Scrum, right? So the first outcome was improved ability to deal with change during projects. So we were doing annual cycle, right, releasing sports games, right? So American football, Madden, NFL football, right? So fixed ship dates once a year in August, right before NFL season starts, you got to release that game, and it's absolutely, that date is known a year ahead. You're going to hit that date, right? Very difficult. So any changes in the plans, the designs, the feature set that come late in the cycle causes complete chaos. Every year they get killed, and so they were looking for a way to better deal with those kind of changes, because it just happens, right? It seems to happen every year. Some late new feature, somebody got a wild and crazy idea, it's got to get in the game, and chaos. So, so they wanted to be able to better adjust and deal with change. The other issue they had was what we call in the game industry crunch. Okay, so crunch is extended hours. Basically, every cycle, at the end of the cycle, there's not enough time. We got to hit that date, and so into this mandatory 80 hours a week. Everybody's here, working all day. Kiss your loved ones goodbye. You'll see them when we ship. Okay, and this was just exhausting, right? So months long at times, you just worked, say 60, 80, 100 hours a week. Okay, and this was every year, year after year, we would go through this problem in the game industry. And so they were hoping that going to a more agile approach could help that. So those are outcomes. Okay, more ability to adjust to change, right? And more flexibility, if you will, agility, right? And reduce crunch. Our first year, we nailed it on the first item. Okay, I'm proud to say that our game came out with a feature set, and it was awesome. It was the largest increase in Metacritic rating any EA game experienced within a 5-year period. So they were shipping like 80 games a year. So to hit that on our little team in Orlando, Florida was, you know, I mean, it made news all over the company. And everybody started looking at, what are you guys doing? With, oh, we went Agile. You guys should try this, right? So, so we had great results on one side. The crunch thing? No. Didn't help. The first year we did not conquer that. We didn't even really make a dent in it. We still crunched at the end of the cycle. And the lesson there, right, what we learned was the problem, again, was a very driven organization around certain gates, and what they didn't let us do, even in an Agile framework at that point, was they didn't let us deal with technical debt. Okay? So basically they said, you have to have functioning software at all of these milestones to get ready to ship the game, which means you have to have code you can share with Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo, right? And so you have all the kind of compliance things. And so what that did was it said, you can't slow down and fix bugs, right? We're going to wait. We're going to fix them all at the end. And of course, what happened, now there's not enough time. We can't fix them. Everybody worked 80 hours a week. And we still crunched at the end in that project. But it made us really think about what are we measuring, how are we measuring it, and the second year we really began to measure technical debt and how do we bring this down so we don't end up in this situation at the end. And so again, you measure the right things, you learn from it, even if you hadn't solved it first time around, right? You come back and reassess, why didn't we hit the outcome we wanted? We're going to measure something else here and improve in another area. All right, so now, who's got a story? Somebody out there, tell me a story. Share with us your own experience. So around metrics, hopefully, if you can, something you were measuring that really helped you guys improve the outcome of the project. Okay, crash there.
Actually, I see times going, and more than I know that measurement usually, like, it's a topic people have in the gut. So maybe a story if you want, but one thing I would like to know is a burning question, like why did that thing happen, or a burning mystery you would like to see solved like today in the next 15 minutes about these measures that are something useful, some about absolutely nothing. So I would like to hear burning questions.
Okay, so I can give an example of the metrics that we use.
Come up a little closer.
Okay. Yeah. The most effective metrics we use is number of commit after 8 p.m. So we had so many bags, so we started measuring the number of commit to the repository after 8 p.m. and it had a good correlation with the number of bugs. So all right, I turned off. That's it.
I think one of the interesting it's not an official measurement. It's one of the figures we can use during the code review is the number of the WTF per minute when developers doing the that one during the code review. That usually cover how to tackle your technical debt quite a bit because when we measure it's still good. But developers see it, they will know.
So any other examples of a creative measurement, either an outcome that kind of like you're trying to reduce crunch, right? It's not your typical outcome somebody might be trying to measure against. Somebody got an example of an outcome, or maybe you're struggling with one. You want to pull the group here, share something you're trying to figure out how to measure and change the outcome. Come on, you guys want to participate? I know you do.
I've got a question. We've been asked to measure velocity. I don't see a lot of value in measuring it, but it's been presented back to senior management. And is it something I'm not seeing that they're seeing, or why do senior management ask for velocity?
I'll give you my purview on it, right? So I actually think velocity is an important metric. It's not the only metric, certainly, but it tells you something, right? You can learn from it, right? And so for me, it's one of those observations over time, and it's also the ability as you tweak things, if you change a member of a team, or you change a process or whatever, you know, you add another QA, you know, whatever, right? You can change things over time, and you see the effect of it in velocity, right? Or maybe the team's just getting more experience. Maybe your product owner is doing a better job of, you know, detailing requirements. They're talking more, right? So you're doing other things, and it may reflect in velocity, right? So it is important to measure it. Senior management likes it because of predictability, right? So what I kind of started with, right? I'm paying the bill for this, right? I hired a team. I'm paying you guys. You better deliver some value for me, right? And I need some way to have confidence, whether that's going back to the board to say, I need more funding for this project, right? I have to be able to predict return on investment. And velocity is one of those ways to be able to say, you know, how much longer do I have to fund this before I get to this much, right, value. So, so velocity is a piece of it. It's not the only measure, but it's a piece, and that's why it's important to management, because yeah, they need to figure out how fast are we going to get there.
Okay, so
and are we getting faster, right?
Well, what else would you include? Because our senior management is only asking for velocity, just one figure and nothing else.
Right.
So what else would you, or might you suggest a measure that might be useful?
Right, so that's there's no simple answer, right? It depends on what is value to them, right? And so this is, and again, this is exactly the challenge, right? Is you've got to get those stakeholders to tell you what's important, right? In the game industry, you know, Metacritic ratings, you know, how's a game reviewed? It's a measure. You know, revenue, of course, is king, right? But you're not going to get revenue if the game isn't rated well because people won't buy, right? So it's a bunch of things you've got to measure, right? And revenue is one of them. But so velocity is a to me, it's a middle management measure, right? It's not the senior management. Senior management doesn't care about velocity; they care about value, right? So you got to find out what's value, right? Is that, you know, views, hits, it's social networking, right? How many times has this been shared on social media, right? You know, there's some other metric that matters to them, right? And it matters either directly to business and finance and revenue, or it matters indirectly to brand and market and, right, you know, visibility or whatever, right? So you got to find out what is it that really drives the business, what's the vision, what's the outcome you want. And if I know what your outcome is, then I can help you pick a metric that feeds into that. Probably multiple metrics, right, that have to work together. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, just to quickly answer as well, velocity is something more for the development team, for them to plan for the next sprint.
Yeah.
It's not really for management or senior management or program manager to look at. It's not even for product owner to predict. It's just a result, it happens.
Yeah.
It goes up and down due to the complexity again. That's a keyword. And again, what do the senior management, they can measure? They can measure like the on mentions, we can measure the value, we can measure revenue, or cover cost saving, or maybe branding. We can measure whether the customer is happy. If our app store, we can measure how many stars we're getting. We can measure internal employee whether they're happy. But because if they are not happy, they are leaving the company. That's, you are losing domain knowledge, you are losing technical knowledge. Not good for me. That's the first bit, the first dimension we can measure by value. The second bit we can measure by time to market, even be delivering lots of value. If there's a new feature that the product owner wants, or if there's a new competitor make a move, how fast can we push the change to the production? Is it 1 week? Is that 2 months or 3 years? If we can do maybe a release every 2 months, maybe we're doing something good. Like there's a second base release frequency, or also release stabilizations. After the sprint finish, do we still need to do performance testing, security testing, UAT, all those others? That's on the second measure is our time to market. The third measure is we can measure our ability to innovate. It's basically linked to what Eric just mentioned, how much technical debt you have. If you have lots of technical debt, if you can measure like in each sprint, how many points you actually on fixing bugs, and how many points you actually develop new features, and how much are defects actually the customer is reporting. Those are in those 3 areas you can measure. That keeps the CEO happy.
So your question was, apart from velocity, what could we measure to make all this useful? I feel like 2 levels of discussion. First, like I don't see velocity very useful in itself. So the story map, visually, like Rodman said in the same title book, we're trying to predict the unpredictable. So the first point is make it stable and predictable, and when it happens, actually, no one really cares about velocity. I've been told that by a project manager. We're trying to figure out the overall velocity of several teams by not adding them up. It was complicated in Excel. Well, one day it'll be up. Yeah, it's not a problem. Just look at the story map. They did it in 4 months, so I know how they work now. This is going to be ready, well, end March, April. This during the summer eventually. So I know how fast they go. I'm good. And that's it. You just look at how fast the green checks are going through the roadmap. So when you go to the team at that moment, what do you see? Velocity, yes, they use it. Some sort of quality check. Some of them are counting the number of unit tests, and some any kind of code quality review, like Sonar will give or something. My point is just they are looking at quality. It's their review, so when they need, they feel a measure, they're going to put it. So they look at quality and they look at this. And the guy look at the story map and he measured it like this and he's happy. The way I use velocity today is to tell, actually, I see a bad use of velocity at the beginning. They say, we're gonna see progress in velocity, right? I seen a dude at the beginning saying, yeah, they're gonna go from 20 to 80 because it's the beginning of the project, right? Well, it never happened. Bad thing I see at the beginning of the project was doubling, but we're talking about just, it's almost a detail at the beginning, but the point is you want to fix velocity, you want stability. And when they say, yeah, but can I push them? Because like, what if the velocity goes up? I said, do you really want your project to be unpredictable? Is that what you want? What do you prefer? Predictable, but it doesn't make the target, so you don't have decision to make, or unpredictable, but then there is hope. What do you like? And they're smart, so they get, okay, I want predictability, then we can make it happen differently. But the one thing I realized that is missing usually, even by the books, every time you bring a curve and this linear burn-up chart or burn-down that tells you a beautiful story of an almost linear progress towards your target, it's good to know it. First, you will put the minimum and the maximum. But you know, it's not about just, you're not firing a bullet, you're steering a wheel all along the journey. So there is this beautiful blend. It's good to have them, like when you're sailing a boat, it's just you have your cape. But there will be life and the universe. And aside from that, I come to me now, and my most practical recommendation, never look or never show a velocity like burn-up, oriented burn-up or burn-down chart if you don't show the top 5 risks beside them. Never look at them separately, never show them separately. Top risk, as easy as it gets, there are a few points you will find on the web. The smallest one, the one who say, here's a top problem that may happen. Here's the probability we give them, and if they happen, here's the impact for the project. So one is about the plan, one is about everything that will blow up the plan. And as far as my experience is concerned, I realize the successful projects are those driven by risk management, like sorting up the problems before they happen the best way possible. You can put them on the roadmap, you can put the alerts, the API that won't be ready, all that type of stuff. But actually when it's predictable, they're gonna make it. No matter what, no matter how, they're gonna figure it out. It's predictable, it's easy, so the point is to make it predictable. So for me, it's not actually measured, you don't have much numbers. I want it to be practical projects and places.
We're kind of out of time.
Okay. Okay.
Having a good time, are we? I just want to kind of wrap up with one comment that kind of came out of listening to you guys, and I know it's like this hottest theme now on shortening release time, right, and continuous delivery, right? Everybody wants to get there. It's like this is the utopia of software development if I can get to continuous delivery. So the important question is, why does that matter, right? And it matters because I can measure then the response, right? I can measure output in smaller increments, right? Less risk, less investment, I can quickly adjust. So the ultimate agility, right, is every day I can observe how people are reacting to what I've done, okay? So that's, you want to do agile metrics, right? Measure very quickly and react very quickly, right? That's what it's really about, right? So that's why there's so many companies now talking about, oh, I can't do this like the game industry, right? Our once a year big release of that game, $60, go to the Walmart and buy it, right? You've got to get to a shorter release cycle, so I take less risk that I've gotten it wrong, designed it wrong, picked the wrong feature set, right? You've got to get those features out there, got to get that feedback, but you got to be paying attention, right? What are they doing? What are they using? How are they responding to it? That's all metrics, right? Measure the output, measure the outcome, right? And then you can react to it. But one last comment. Every metric, if you're going to measure something, it better be actionable, okay? So I always say this, right? Don't collect a bunch of data if you don't know what to do with it, right? So measure something you understand or you need to understand, right, so you can react, okay? It's got to be actionable, okay? If somebody's asking you for a report on velocity or whatever, right, you say, all right, so what are you going to do if velocity changes? Exactly. So don't ask me about velocity because you have no idea what it means and you don't know what you're going to do if velocity changes. Okay, so stop worrying about velocity. Let me worry about velocity, right, internally, because it matters to us. It doesn't matter to you. You're not going to react to it. Okay, so measure something that's actionable and say, in some cases, you got to figure out. I don't know what this quantified metric means until I've studied it over time. Right? It may be a pretty good number. I don't know till I have a chance to really assess that. So anyway, get out there, quantify things, and measure something useful so you can react to it. All right, was this helpful? Was this fun? Yeah. Okay.
Can I have a roti?
Oh, I got a book to give away too. Wait.
Can you have a 1 to 5 note? Just 5 is, oh, it's way more value than I have thought. 1 is, I could have been elsewhere. 3 is, it was worth my time no more. Can I have a note?
It was worth your time to be here? Yeah. All right.
Okay, you remove 2 because they are nice.
Okay.
Yeah, they were just being polite. That's right. All right. Okay. Thank you for your questions.